Welcome to the SEI podcast series, a production of the Carnegie Mellon University Software Engineering Institute. The SEI is a federally funded research and development center sponsored by the U.S. Department of Defense. A transcript of today's podcast is posted on the SEI website at sei.cmu.edu/podcasts.
Welcome to the SEI podcast series. My name is Suzanne Miller, and I'm a principal researcher here in the SEI Software Solutions Division. Today, I'm very pleased to welcome to our podcast Matt Butkovic, Technical Director of Cyber Risk and Resilience within the SEI CERT Division. Today, he's joining us to talk about his team's very exciting work in assisting the World Economic Forum with mapping high-level cybersecurity challenges. Welcome, Matt.
Hello, Suzanne. Great to be here.
Excellent. So before we delve into our topic, let's start by having you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and the work you do here at the SEI. People like to know sort of about the people that we're talking to. What's the best part of your job?
Sure, thanks. So I've been with the SEI for about 11 years. Prior to that, I worked in industry, specifically manufacturing and then banking before that. My focus here at the SEI is really on helping organizations understand their cybersecurity posture, so both from a process perspective and from a technical perspective. I also am adjunct faculty and teach graduate courses at the Heinz College, and I participate in executive education programs for the Heinz College, so the CISO program, the CIO program, the CRO program.
Excellent.
There was a question about what I like best about my job, and I think that if I had to describe the single best thing about my job, it's the intellectual freedom I have to explore things that I find interesting and relevant and useful for the profession.
I agree with that. There's amazing things that I've learned here I never would have been able to learn anywhere else, and certainly not in industry. So I second that. All right, but today we're here to talk about your work with the World Economic Forum. And tell us a little bit about the catalyst for this engagement, because the SEI is not the Software Economic Institute, right? We're the Software Engineering Institute. So how did this come about?
Yeah, certainly. So it's an interesting story and one that is somewhat unique. This is truly a whole of CMU story. So the World Economic Forum has engaged CMU on a number of topics. Cybersecurity is just one of them. So the initial request for our participation came from Dr. Jahanian's office through our business development function here at CERT. So Joe McLeod brought the opportunity to me, and we then assembled a team to address how best we could help the World Economic Forum in curating an artifact they call a transformation map.
So what is a transformation map? Give our audience a little bit of background on that if they haven't read about this yet.
Yeah, certainly. So the World Economic Forum uses the term transformation map to mean a set of connected concepts that define a specific domain of interest. For instance, cybersecurity or artificial intelligence or vaccines. It spans the entire spectrum of topics. And it's a way to affinity match concepts and then, moreover, maybe most importantly, create linkage between those topics. For instance, the cybersecurity transition map then linked to other topics. I'll give you an example. So the cybercrime topic links to the broader topic of crime. The automation and machine learning pieces of our discussion of cyber link to those topics in the top level categories as well.
Okay. So it's a sophisticated concept map, and it allows the World Economic Forum to look at relationships between different areas of interest and perhaps find connections that they can leverage, or that in your case that might actually be ones that they need to be aware of in terms of risk. So
yeah, that's exactly right. The primary purpose of the map is to lead the reader into specific channels of information that may be of interest for them. So it's meant to convey a path in a very concise manner to those that are interested.
And when you think about things like cybersecurity, cyber resilience, that path is needed. A guided path is needed, because otherwise there's just too many things to think about. And our brains, even though we don't use all of our brains, we still can't put all that stuff together in a picture that allows us to act, right? That's one of the things I know in my own work with the little work that I've done with cybersecurity. It can be very numbing to look at all the possible scenarios and all the possible risks and go, what am I going to do about this? So what does CERT bring to the table in this work? I'm kind of leading the witness here because I know one of the things you're going to say, but how is it that you make this manageable and you get the information that you need to create this kind of a transformation map?
Yeah, I think your description is really a good one, which is if you look at this as an inexhaustible catalog of problems, it's so daunting that you don't know where to start. And it's sort of the paradox of choice problem. If I said, here are 10,000 topics to have a look at, you may pick none. But people think in stories, they think in narratives. So in a sense, the transformation maps are a set of narratives that lead you to specific topics germane to that subject. What does CERT bring to this? Well, I would like to think that CERT is a premier cybersecurity equity. As you know, we are one of the nation's oldest cybersecurity equities. Mm-hmm. And I think that the honor of us being asked to curate this specific map cements our position, or maybe reconfirms our position globally as thought leaders in the space.
Yes, and I am, and personally, as somebody who has economic interests, even though they may not be like the big financial ones, I'm glad you're there. Because making our connections into the security realm related to economics, I think, is one of the big things. And when I look at, so in 2008, I worked with some of the CERT folks in doing some scenario planning on cyber and cyber resilience. And at the time, that was like the first time that I had really hit the topic of cyber crime and how cyber crime could be such an impacting area of criminal activity that I just never really thought of before, and that's one of the areas you mentioned. This is really now 12, 13 years later, we've seen a lot, ransomware, et cetera, cyber crime, but now I think we're getting more of a handle on it, and these kinds of maps are one of the ways that people can understand what is the connection between my economic issues, my cyber resilience issues, criminal activity, things like that. Who did you collaborate with to get some of that additional knowledge? Because it isn't just the knowledge inside the SEI that makes this work.
Sure. So the team had a broad base of experiences. I tried to draw on those, of course, that had the most expert opinion that we could find within the organization. So within CERT, I was working with, in no particular order, with Chris Rush, Chris May, with Alan Levine, and Brett Tucker. That was the team.
What about collaborators within the Economic Forum and the Carnegie Mellon community?
Sure. So the process that WorldEconomic Forum provides is that you have two key contacts within the World Economic Forum, and they really want you to bring the ideas to the table. So it wasn't as if they were feeding us specific content, but rather suggesting topics of interest based on the views and downloads that they receive. So we were, and I'm still working with these folks today, we're given two cyber experts within the World Economic Forum, and they helped guide the process. And one of the things that I found interesting was we were writing for a truly global audience. So everything from the use of idioms to assuming that the U.S. Was not engaged in things that made the world nervous. So there are things that are quite different from the way that we write or express ourselves domestically.
I've done some international work as well, and I know exactly what you're saying. We are not the center of the universe, even though we sometimes think that we are. And the World Economic Forum is one of the places that you see that there's a lot going on outside of our own borders that affect us, certainly, but that we don't control. Now, we talked about sort of the fact that there's so many topics, and thankfully it's not 10,000 topics, but there's like 273 challenges is the number that I've got. They're challenges that are transforming economies and industries. That's sort of where you started with the conceptual interconnections. What kind of content did you add to that content that was already there? And do you think you had any effect on how those transformations are being perceived by the users of this kind of map?
Yeah, certainly. So when you think about it, those challenges are meant as a superset of concerns about the vitality and survival of the global economy, right? So this is really top level concerns, and then decomposes into more fine-grained concerns. One of the areas that I thought was underrepresented, and I feel proud of the fact that we're able to convince the World Economic Forum that we need to say more about the supply chain, specifically how cyber both underpins the broader supply chain and then the cyber supply chain itself, if that makes sense, right? So I've described it as the silver thread of cyber. Everything that we do economically at some level, with very few exceptions, is going to tie back to some exchange of digital information. And with that as sort of the backdrop, we would then explore a number of related issues in the supply chain. For instance, how do you develop and maintain justified confidence in your supply chain partners? How do you determine what a worst case scenario looks like? So how do you determine the resilience you need and then the resilience you have currently? So these are all things that we were able to bake into our new content.
And one of the things, we're seeing some of that right now in terms of supply chain disruptions, some of which have to do with, COVID-related kinds of disruption, but also cyber disruptions are things that when you don't realize until it happens often that, this little part way down the supply chain is an integral piece that if it's not there, we just take for granted it's there. If it's not there, we're not going to be able to achieve the economic benefit that we're looking for from whether it's a Ford Bronco or anything else that we're looking to take advantage of. So that's very cool. And I have other friends in CERT that work supply chain issues, so I'm like, yeah.
It's interesting to have been asked to do this by the World Economic Forum in the middle of what we hope is a once in a century pandemic, and at a time also when I would argue there's this convergence of cybercrime and critical infrastructure concerns. So, for instance, the Colonial Pipeline hack and SolarWinds were occurring as we were developing this content, and that certainly influenced the way we thought about things.
And probably was helpful in getting people that aren't used to thinking about cyber and cyber resilience. You've got some real world examples that are affecting not just the US, but a lot of equities across the world. So
yeah,
not that you want, I guess it's sort of making lemonade out of lemons. You don't want to have SolarWinds or, the pipeline disaster, but if you're going to have them, at least you got some benefit in terms of maybe preventing something worse in the future by making people aware of some of these issues.
Yeah, and we didn't. Yeah, absolutely correct. And one of the elements that we needed to address was the human element. So if you review the transformation map, you'll see that there's also a component where we're looking at workforce development. And I think it's important to understand how these things fit together. When you're in a highly complex situation with too few people to understand it, it kind of compounds your problems. And that in cyber, I'd argue, is experiencing that right now.
Say more.
Well, right. So it's generally accepted, and I believe to be true, that there's a shortage of qualified cyber resources globally. And there's a war on for talent. All of these things come out in what we wrote for WEF. So how do you ensure that you're focusing your energies on training people on the things that are relevant today and anticipating tomorrow? Doing it at scale. And then another section of the content, which I'm quite proud of, is we spoke to casting a wider net. How do we ensure that people with diverse backgrounds and from underrepresented groups are part of cyber going forward?
Okay. So I'm not the World Economic Forum. I am a business owner in automotive or in healthcare or in some other, in an economic entity, but not sort of at that World Economic Forum level. What can I do with a roadmap like this? Is there something that when you sort of take it out of the broad worldwide that I can do as someone local or as a researcher or even as a cybersecurity manager? What are some of the uses of this kind of mapping for other equities in our supply chain for security?
Sure. So you don't have to be a Fortune 100 company to find benefit in this, right? So the list of concerns or considerations that we lay out in the transformation map apply universally. Now the scale is going to be different,
Sure.
but that's kind of the point of the format that in which we develop these, which is these can't be niche concerns only for the few, but rather we're focusing on broad problems that are universally recognized.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter if you're a bank or a hospital or a nonprofit, you're experiencing now and will likely experience the things that are described by virtue of participating in this cyber-enabled global economy, which is unavoidable. So that sounds a bit dramatic, but that's really the truth, which is there is really no off the grid for very long, right? So this is a roadmap for the things on the grid that you should be aware of when you're participating in the grid.
Okay, that's a good advertisement for this. So you've got me. So I want to learn more about this. What are the kinds of resources besides the map itself that would help me with addressing some of these things?
Sure. So the World Economic Forum is a membership organization. So there's a portion of the content that requires subscription, and there's a portion of the content that's free to everyone. So the World Economic Forum website has summary reports, really interesting analysis that they've done. So there's a catalog of artifacts out there in addition to the transformation maps that we're speaking about today.
Okay, and the World Economic Forum is the source for those.
Yes.
I imagine we link to those from our blog posts and things like that, and we will link to those from the transcript for today's podcast as well. We always link to external things like that.
Yeah, and I would offer this as well so that you'll see us mention specific tools, techniques, standards of practice. Well, not surprisingly, we're drawing on things that in some part we've created. So consider the SEI catalog of artifacts as another source.
Good. So what's next for Matt? You've got kind of, this is arguably a very capstone kind of very high visibility sort of thing. What are some of the other things that are interesting you in terms of problem spaces that you and your team are working to solve that are not necessarily represented in this activity?
Yeah, certainly. So there's many to pick from, but I'll highlight just a few. We take it as ground truth that certain things in cyber are important, right? So I'm thinking of specific controls and specific safeguards. We are working on ways to add some scientific rigor to that, to say, well, okay, if this safeguard really is important, how important is it in relation to other things? How do you measure that? And then that leads to something else that we're very keen to understand, which is the investment decisions that are made in cyber.
Okay, so you're looking at value analysis and investment analysis and kind of merging those together for those very foundational safeguards is the way I would put it.
Correct. And I'd say that the efficacy of controls is something that is underexplored in cyber.
Okay.
So I think as cyber evolves and matures as a discipline or a profession, we are going to see, I hope, the level of analysis and quantification that you see in software engineering applied to cyber. And we've done that with things like the maturity models we've built, right? But I think one of the foundational elements we could make better in cyber is measurement. So heavy focus on measurement in my group.
Yeah, and I would say, one of the things I've observed over the last 10 years in particular, as cyber has become more personal, I'll put it that way. The guy that owns the hair salon where I get my purple hair, he talks to me about cyber issues because I work at the SEI, right? And, 20 years ago, I would not be talking to a salon owner about cybersecurity, right? And so the more personal and ubiquitous the concern gets, I think there is actually more of a responsibility for us to say, and we know, we don't just assume that these controls are the right ones. Here's the evidence. Here's the real evidence that they are. And it's not just anecdotal anymore. We have a big enough sample that we can actually do, more quantified and quantifiable measurement of it. So I think that's a great direction, because I think there's going to be a point where people are going to rebel and say, I'm tired of dealing with all this cybersecurity. I've got to do 16 things to get into my phone. And, we have to have a way of saying, well, here's where the science is. Here's where the benefits are. These 4 over here, minimal efficacy unless you're in these settings. These 12, sorry, dude, it's 12. If you don't want ransomware, you're going to have to go through this.
That's exactly right. So, something that I find myself saying in the executive education space is we need to remind ourselves, and CISOs don't always love this message, especially if they're like technologists by background. Everything we do in cybersecurity is subordinate to a risk decision.
Yeah.
So the risk-informed selection of control, safeguards, this is really essential. To your point, we have to focus on the critical few. That also leads to the understanding of the return on security investment, which is largely voodoo in many circles right now. So we want to make strides there. So I think also understanding that it's the combination of technology, people, and process that makes cyber is really important. So again, not to sound too pejorative, but I think moving from this being the domain of the technologist to this being the domain of the risk analyst is a step change for us.
And the human behaviorist. One of the things that I've always admired about the work done in CERT is there's always been people that have been looking at the human element of this and understanding that it's humans that make the risk decisions and the implementation decisions about what we are not going to implement. And so understanding the human aspect of this is a true socio-technical system.
Yes.
And we can't just let the technologists rule, much as it might be attractive to do so.
Well, Suzanne, if I may, there's another element to this that we should discuss. So there's also a number of nascent privacy projects that we're very interested in. So I'm thinking about your description of making this personal. Probably the number one sort of set of questions that we get, at the barber shop or at the grocery store from my relatives are really about privacy, right? How do we know that our information is not being stolen or misused? So those personal risk calculations, the trustworthiness of the technology, all of these things have to fit together. And I do think that the ability to gather data and analyze data has outpaced our thinking about the correct ethical uses of data. So I think this is another frontier for us at CERT.
Yep, and this relates also to our artificial intelligence, machine learning, all of that. The sort of ethics component is coming to the forefront way more than it has in the last 20 years. So I think you're going to be busy.
Yes, in a really good way, and I think that the work we've done for the World Economic Forum, which is again sort of a whole of CMU initiative, I think that we'll see more of this. That we're going to draw on. We're going to draw on those who know the most and have the most to add, coming from many elements. Here at the SEI, I'm quite proud of the collaboration we have with SSDE and with ETC.
Yep. Well, and this is, I've been associated with the SEI since 1993, and we get these opportunities once in a while. They don't come all the time. So it's very exciting when we get something like this that we really can have a worldwide impact. And that's when I feel like yes, it goes, our DoD mission, how do we make our world safer? One of the ways we make it safer is by making it safer to have an economy that blooms across the world, so that people aren't feeling like they have to compete all the time. And competition leads to other things. So there's a whole lot that this really serves in terms of our mission. And so thank you very much for working through this, because I know that there had to have been some interesting moments as you went through these discussions.
Absolutely, yeah. So it was the best kind of busy, though, right? I mean, it is certainly of high impact and enduring, and it was a pleasure to do it.
How much? We didn't talk about this before, but how much were you able to do virtually versus how much did you do in person for this activity? Since we're in the COVID world right now.
Yeah, so that was a really interesting aspect of this too. So the Well, I believe all of the revision of the transformation map happened virtually. So this was unfolding essentially late last winter into early this spring, before I was back in the office or anyone else on my team really consistently. Yeah. So it was done essentially all virtually, and then we're having calls with people in Geneva, right? So it was international and virtual.
Yeah. Okay. So you didn't get all the extra travel points out of it, but you were able to stay home and stay safe. So that's good too.
Yes, I'm hoping at some point we could parlay that into a trip to Geneva. But yes, that it was all virtual. And
we all want a trip to Geneva. Of course we do. Yeah. All right. I want to thank you so much for talking with us and our audience today about this work. I'm very excited about it and to see where it goes from here. For our audience, we will include links in the transcripts to resources we've talked about during the podcast. And Matt, I look forward to talking with you in the future. And thank you so much for joining us today.
It was my pleasure.
Thanks for joining us. This episode is available where you download podcasts, including SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts. It is also available on the SEI website at sei.cmu.edu/podcasts and the SEI's YouTube channel. This copyrighted work is made available through the Software Engineering Institute, a federally funded research and development center sponsored by the U.S. Department of Defense. For more information about the SEI and this work, please visit www.sei.cmu.edu. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email us at info@sei.cmu.edu. Thank you.